I discovered my sister's terrifying secret at our father's funeral. Right after we buried him, she handed me a hidden letter he wrote before dying. Inside, my father was deeply hurt by a private phone conversation we supposedly had, a conversation that completely ruined his trust in me. But here is the scary part: I never said those things. That phone call never happened. Someone had lied to my dying father, pretending to be me, just to destroy my relationship with him and steal his love. Looking at my sister across the room, my blood ran cold. I realized exactly who did it, and the dark truth behind her smile. Before I take you back to the beginning of how she did it, if this story is already sitting somewhere uncomfortable in your chest, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop your city and the time below. I genuinely love knowing where you're listening from. It helps more than you know. Now, let me tell you how far back this actually goes. I grew up in a house in central Ohio, a mid-sized city. A neighborhood of older homes with good trees and narrow driveways, the kind of street where people knew each other's cars and left space for the kids on bikes. My parents had lived in that house since before I was born. My father worked in civil engineering for the county. My mother, Diane, taught 4th grade until I was 12. The house smelled like coffee in the morning and something cooking in the evening, and my father kept the backyard the way some men keep a project, always something to tend. Always something almost done. We were, by most measures, an ordinary family. There were 4 of us. My parents, my sister Claire, and me. Claire is 4 years older, which meant when we were children, she was always a little further ahead. Always in the grade I hadn't reached yet, always moving into the next room of life, while I was still learning the one I was in. She was quick in a way that I was not quick with words, quick with people, quick with the kind of social navigation that made adults smile and lean in. I was quieter. I took longer to say things. I thought a lot before I spoke, which sometimes read as hesitation to people who didn't know me. I was not my sister, and I had always understood this. I did not resent it. Not then. It was simply the geography of our family. My mother understood the difference between us the way good teachers understand different students, not as a hierarchy, but as a fact of how people are built. She had a specific language with me that was different from her language with Claire. Slower, more patient, more interested in what was underneath the answer I gave rather than just the answer itself. There was a particular thing between my mother and me. A small private habit we had formed when I was about 9 years old. She had started leaving notes. Not in my lunchbox the way parents sometimes do, but tucked into specific places. Inside the cover of whatever book I was reading. Underneath my cereal bowl on weekend mornings. One folded corner of a napkin with something small written on it. An observation. A joke. A line from something she had read that she thought I would like. She never told Claire about the notes. I don't know if it was deliberate. I think it was simply the way the notes grew, naturally, quietly. Between the 2 of us, the way some things grow in a family that belonged to just 2 people. I kept them in a shoebox on the shelf in my closet. My father was a good man. I want to say this clearly, and I want to say it first, before anything else. He was not the villain of this story. He was a man who worked hard, loved his family in the direct and slightly formal way of men of his generation, and trusted the people he loved. That trust was the most important thing about him. And it was the thing that was eventually used against him. And against me. My mother died the spring I turned 19. She was 53. It was a stroke, sudden, fast, without warning. She was at school on a Tuesday, and by Thursday she was gone. I do not have the words for what that loss was. I am not sure I ever will. What I can tell you is what happened to our family in the months after. My father grieved by going very quiet. He continued to work. He continued to maintain the backyard. He sat in his chair in the evenings and read, and if you passed through the room he would look up and give you a small, steady smile that meant he was still there, he was still present, even if some part of him had gone somewhere no one could follow. He was not good at asking for help. He was not good at showing need. Claire stepped into the space that opened up. She was 23. She had recently graduated, was living nearby, was between jobs in a way that meant she had time and presence. She came to the house often. She organized things. She helped with meals and appointments and the thousand small logistical pieces that Diane had always managed without anyone noticing. She was competent and warm, and exactly what a grieving father might need. She also became, without anyone deciding it, the person who translated the family to itself. When Dad needed to understand what was happening with me, why I had missed a visit, why I seemed distracted on the phone, what I was thinking about a decision, he asked Claire. He had always been a little better at talking to Claire. She spoke his language more fluently. She met him at his own register, practical, forward-moving, solutions-oriented. I spoke a different language. I needed more time, more silence, more of the kind of conversation my mother had been good at. With my mother gone, that conversation had no home, and Claire became the interpreter. At the time, I thought nothing of it. At the time, I thought it was just grief and adjustment and the particular shape our family had taken without her. I did not understand, I could not have understood, that interpretation is power. That the person who explains you to someone who loves you is holding something very specific in their hands. And I did not understand yet what my sister had decided to do with what she was holding. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I couldn't name it. I was 21. I had switched my major from education to communications midway through my junior year of college. It was not a dramatic decision. It was a considered one. I had been unhappy in the education program for a year, had spoken with advisors, had weighed it carefully. I was not impulsive. It added 1 semester to my degree. My grades improved. I felt, for the first time in 2 years, like I was moving in the right direction. I told my father on a Sunday phone call. His response was warm but careful. He said he hoped it was the right choice. He said he just wanted me to be sure. He asked gently, in the way he asked careful questions, whether I had thought it through, or whether this was one of those decisions I'd made quickly and would need to reconsider later. I told him I had thought it through. He said, okay. And then there was a pause, and in the pause I could hear something, not suspicion exactly, but something watchful. Something waiting to be confirmed. I got off the phone and sat with that feeling for a while. I told myself it was grief. I told myself he was still adjusting. I told myself I was reading into a pause on a phone call. I did not call Claire to ask what they had talked about. I wish, now, that I had. Over the next several years, there were more moments like that one. Small moments. Nothing you could hold up and say, this is the thing. Nothing dramatic. Just a slightly altered quality in my father's attention when I told him things. A specific kind of care in his questions that felt less like interest and more like assessment. When I was 23, I left a relationship. The man I had been with for 2 years was someone my father liked. They had met a handful of times, had spoken on the phone, had the kind of easy, practical rapport that my father had with people who spoke his language. Leaving him was the right decision. He had been unfaithful, and when I found out, I left. Quietly, without drama, without a scene. I told my father. Not the details, just that it had ended, that I was okay, that I was moving forward. He said he was sorry to hear it. But then, about a month later, he mentioned in passing, the way you mention something you've already processed, that Claire had said I was struggling more than I let on. That I had told Claire the breakup had been harder on me than I was admitting. That he was glad I had her to talk to. I had not told Claire any of that. I had not told anyone I was struggling. Because I wasn't, particularly. I sat with that one longer. I told myself sisters talk. I told myself Claire was probably just worried and had extrapolated from something small. I told myself I was being sensitive. I moved cities at 25. A better job opportunity. A chance to build something of my own at a distance from the specific gravity of home. This is a thing adults do. It is an ordinary decision. Claire told my father I was running from something. I know this because Dad mentioned it obliquely, gently, the way he mentioned things he was worried about 2 months after I had moved. He asked if everything was okay. If I was settling in. If there was anything I needed to tell him. I told him everything was fine. I told him I was happy. I told him the new city was good. He said, Claire just worries about you. You know how she is. I said I knew. I said she didn't need to. He said, well. And in that well, I heard everything he hadn't said. By the time I was 28, there was a texture to my relationship with my father that I had accepted as simply the way we were. He loved me. I knew this. It was not complicated or conditional, it was simply true. But there was a quality of caution in it. A particular kind of care that did not quite fit with what I knew of myself. As though he was always watching a little closely. Always gently checking. I had a friend at the time, a woman named Paulette, who had known me since college, who once said, after meeting my father at a family event, "He treats you like you're more fragile than you are." I nodded and let it go. I did not have the framework, yet, to understand what she was seeing. I didn't know that my father's caution was not his own. I didn't know he had been taught it. I'm going to pause here for a moment. Because I know what some of you might be thinking right now, that I should have pushed harder, asked more questions, confronted Claire sooner. And I want to tell you something about why I didn't. When the person who is distorting your life is someone who loves you, or someone who performs love convincingly, you don't look for the mechanism. You look for your own mistakes. You wonder what you're doing wrong. You assume the off-center feeling is coming from inside you. If you have ever been in that position, if you have ever felt slightly mistranslated in your own family and couldn't understand why, leave a comment below. I read them all. Because this is the part of the story that people don't talk about enough. The part where the damage is invisible while it's happening. Where the trap is only legible from the outside, looking back. I did not understand the architecture of it until after the funeral. But I can describe it to you now with clarity, because once you see it, the shape of it is unmistakable. My sister Claire never spoke against me to my face. She never called me unstable in a room I was standing in. She never contradicted my version of events in front of my father while I was present. The only place the campaign lived was in rooms I was never in. She used the language of concern. Not accusation, concern. There is a specific difference, and it matters enormously. Accusation can be argued with. Concern cannot. If someone accuses you of something, you can say, "That is not true, here is the truth." But if someone says I'm worried about her, if someone says she seems like she's not coping well, if someone says she made another impulsive choice, and I just don't want to say anything because I don't want to upset her, there is no clean counter to that. Concern sounds like love. It sounds like someone paying attention. It is the most effective disguise for harm that I know of. She used real events and removed their context. Everything she told my father was traceable to something that had actually happened. I did change my major. I did leave my relationship. I did move cities. I did, at various points, seem distracted or distant or less available than he wanted me to be. All of it was true. The context, the reasons, the logic, the actual facts of each situation was not included. A decision stripped of its context becomes a symptom. She positioned herself as my protector. This is the piece that took me longest to understand, because on its surface it looked like love. Claire's concern for me gave her a permanent place in the conversation between my father and his younger daughter. Every time she expressed worry, she made herself necessary. She was the one who understood me enough to translate me. She was the one who could help him navigate my complexity. Without her, he was on his own with a daughter he didn't quite understand. She made sure he always felt a little bit on his own without her. And, because she positioned herself as my advocate, worried, protective, doing her best, my father never thought to look for her fingerprints on what he was believing. He trusted her. She was his older daughter. She had been there through the worst of his grief, had helped him hold the family together, had been steady and present when he needed it most. He had no reason to doubt her. That was the luck. And she had the key. There is one moment I can pinpoint now, a single specific instance that I did not understand at the time, but that became, in hindsight, the clearest evidence of the shape of things. I was 31. I had driven home for a week in November, a regular visit, nothing special. On the second evening, Dad and I were sitting in the kitchen after dinner, and he said something that stopped me. He said he was glad I had finally found a therapist who was a good fit. I had not told him I was in therapy. I had told Claire in passing several months before because it came up naturally in a conversation, the way these things sometimes do. I mentioned it briefly and moved on. Dad seemed to think this was something we had talked about at length. He said he had been hoping I would find someone for a long time. He said he knew it had been a hard road. I remember looking at him across the kitchen table and feeling a version of vertigo. Not because I was ashamed of being in therapy, I wasn't. Not because I had wanted to hide it, I hadn't, particularly. But because of the phrase a hard road. Because of what it implied about what he understood my life to be. I asked him carefully what he meant. He said something gentle and vague, the way he spoke when he thought he might be getting into territory I didn't want to discuss. He mentioned something about the difficulties I'd had. The struggles. I said, "What struggles, Dad?" And he looked at me with a kind of careful love that broke my heart a little. The look of a man who doesn't want to upset you by naming what he has already decided is true. "You know," he said, "just, things have been hard. Since your mother. You've had a harder time than you let people see." I did not argue with him. I said, "I think I'm doing okay, actually." He said, "I know you say that." He believed her version of me more than he believed me. That was the moment I understood there was a version of me that existed in my father's mind that I had no access to. A woman he had been given, built piece by piece from every conversation he'd had with Claire over the years, that looked like me and had my name and made my decisions, but was profoundly, quietly different from the person I actually was. I just didn't know yet how it had been built. Or how thoroughly. I need to stop here and tell you something important. Because this story is not about a father who didn't love his daughter. And I do not want it to become that. My father loved me. Genuinely, specifically, in all the particular ways a man like him knew how to show it. He remembered the small things. He asked about people by name, about Paulette, about the colleagues I mentioned, about the specific details of projects I was working on. When I succeeded at something, he noticed in a way that felt real and unperformative. He drove 3 hours to help me move apartments twice, once in the rain, without complaint. When we were alone, not often enough, but sometimes, in the moments when Claire wasn't present to translate, he was different. Warmer. Funnier. He had a very dry sense of humor that he kept mostly to himself, that you only got if you were paying close attention. He made small, precise observations about the world that surprised you, that made you think he had been watching more carefully than you'd realized. There is a specific afternoon I returned to. I was 33. A Sunday in October, overcast, one of those days that smells like the year getting ready to turn. I had come home for the weekend. Claire was away, a work thing, something out of town. It was just the two of us, which was genuinely unusual by then. We raked leaves in the backyard together in the late morning. It sounds ordinary. It was ordinary. But there was a quality to that afternoon that I have carried since. He told me about a project he'd been involved with early in his career, a small bridge in a county I'd never been to, the one that had made him feel, for the first time, like the work mattered. He described the way he had felt watching it go up. He described what it was like to build something that would outlast him. I told him about a piece I was writing, a long piece that I had been struggling with for months, that finally felt like it was coming together. He said, "Tell me what it's about." So I told him. He listened the way he always listened when it was just the two of us, without looking for the diagnosis in it, without the slight watchfulness that I had come to associate with conversations about my life. He just listened. He asked questions. He seemed genuinely interested. At some point he said, "You know what you remind me of? Your mother when she had a big idea. You get the same look." I did not answer right away. He said, "She would have liked to see you doing this." We finished the leaves. We had lunch at the kitchen table. We drove to the hardware store in the afternoon for something minor and walked the aisles for 20 minutes longer than necessary, the way you do when you're not in a hurry and the company is easy. I drove home that evening feeling, for the first time in a long time, like I knew my father. Like I had sat with him, the real him, without a layer of translated misunderstanding between us. I have thought about that afternoon many times since. It is the memory I hold separate from everything else. It is the one Claire could not reach. In his final years, Dad's health began to slow in the way that happens gradually and then all at once. Claire was the closer one, geographically. She managed the appointments, the medications, the relationship with his doctor. She was organized and thorough. She was there in ways I could not always be. I am not going to pretend this was not real, because it was. She was present. She was helpful. She did things that needed doing. What I know now is that presence is also proximity. And proximity is access. And access over 14 years had meant that by the time my father was declining, the version of me that lived in his mind was thoroughly, carefully constructed. He loved me. I believe that completely. But the me he loved was, in part, someone Claire had invented. I want to go back to the window now. Back to the reception and the folded piece of paper in my hand. I stood there for a long time. Around me, the house was full. 40 or 50 people, maybe. Old friends of my father's from work. Neighbors he had known for decades. Relatives who had driven in from other states. Claire's friends from the church committee she'd been on. My father's closest friend, a man named Gerald, who had worked with him for nearly 20 years and had come to every Christmas dinner I could remember, who was standing near the hallway with a paper plate, looking at the floor. I had noticed Gerald earlier in the afternoon. He had caught my eye twice in the first hour and both times had looked away, not quickly, not guiltily, but with a particular kind of intention. The look of a man deciding whether to say something. I folded the letter back up, put it in my pocket, picked up my water glass, and stood by the window for another few minutes. Then I went to find Gerald. He was still in the hallway when I approached. He had set his plate down. He was looking at a framed photograph on the wall, a photo from a camping trip from the late 90s, my father young and sunburned, squinting into the camera. I stood next to him and looked at the photo too. After a moment, he said, "Your dad talked about you a lot." I said I was glad. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He loved you very much. I want you to know that first." I looked at him. He said, "I want you to know I never believed what she told me. About the episodes. The instability." He said the word carefully, like it had a bad taste. "Your dad was more worried than he let on, sometimes. She kept him worried. I want you to know I never thought it was true." I asked him how long this had been going on. He said, "Since your mother passed. Pretty much from the start." He didn't say more. He picked his plate back up. He told me again that my father had loved me. He squeezed my arm once and walked away toward the kitchen. I stood in the hallway alone. I did not cry. I noticed that my hands were steady. I noticed the specific smell of cut flowers from the living room and the sound of someone clattering dishes in the kitchen, and the way the light came through the window at the end of the hall. I walked to the bathroom and ran cold water over my wrists for a moment, the way my mother had taught me to when I was small and overwhelmed. "It brings your temperature down," she used to say. "It brings you back to yourself." I looked at my face in the mirror for a long time. Then I dried my hands, straightened my clothes, and walked back into the reception. I did not say anything to Claire that day. I want you to understand that clearly. Because the next part of this story is about what I did instead, and it matters that I did not act from the place I was standing in that hallway. I acted from somewhere steadier. Somewhere I could only get to after time. In the weeks after the funeral, I helped with the estate. It is one of the strange privileges of grief. The practical work gives you somewhere to put your hands. There are papers to organize, belongings to sort through, accounts to close. It is not comfortable work, but it is work, and it occupies the parts of you that would otherwise just sit with the loss. Claire and I divided the tasks. She handled the financial accounts, the legal filings, the coordination with the attorney. She was efficient at these things, and I was grateful for that efficiency, even then, even knowing what I was beginning to understand. I handled the house. The sorting of my father's study. The books, the binders, the decades of accumulated paper that a methodical man leaves behind him. My father kept journals. I found them on the third shelf of his study closet, behind a row of engineering manuals, 6 notebooks, the same kind, dark blue with a black spine, the kind you can buy at any drugstore. The first one began the year my mother died. The last entry was from 8 months before his death. He had never mentioned them to me. I sat with the first one for a long time before I opened it. When I did, I read carefully. Slowly. The way you read something that you understand you will only get one chance to receive correctly. He wrote about work, some. About the backyard. About things he was reading, things he was thinking about. He wrote about my mother with a specific, private grief that I will not describe here because those passages belong only to him. And he wrote about his daughters. About Claire, her visits, her help, her competence, his gratitude for her. About me, his love, his hope, and a steady, recurring thread of worry that appeared again and again across the years. I could trace it. Entry by entry, year by year, I could trace exactly when the worry had thickened into something else. When the concern had shifted from the ordinary concern of a parent for a child navigating the world into something more specific and fixed. Something clinical. And I could trace, alongside it, the conversations with Claire. Called Claire this evening. She mentioned that she'd heard from, and then my name, and that things seemed hard. She worries about her judgment in these situations. I hope she's getting support. Claire stopped by. We talked about, and then some practical family business, and at the end she mentioned she's been concerned about the patterns she's seen. She said she tries not to bring it up too much because she doesn't want to push her away. I appreciate that she keeps me informed. Spoke with Claire on Sunday. She said she'd tried to reach her and hadn't heard back for 2 weeks. She thinks she pulls away when she's not coping. I worry about this. Entry after entry. Year after year. The worry, dutifully recorded, in my father's careful handwriting. All of it sourced from Claire. I called my Aunt Renata, my father's younger sister, about 3 weeks after the funeral. Renata had been at the reception. She was not someone I spoke to often, but she had known our family for a long time, had been close to my mother, had maintained a warm if infrequent presence in my life. I did not call her with an agenda. I called her to check in, and because I needed to hear someone who had known all 4 of us talk about my father. We spoke for a long time. About him. About his goodness. About the particular silence of grief. At some point, she said, I always wondered, when you were younger, you seemed so solid to me. I was surprised, sometimes, by how worried your father was. I asked her what she meant. She said, he used to mention, I don't know, that you were struggling. That he was concerned about you. This was over many years. She paused. I never saw it myself. But I assumed he knew things I didn't. She said, carefully, Claire used to call me sometimes. Over the years. She framed it as asking for advice. How to support you. What I had seen when I'd been around you. Another pause. I never had anything worrying to tell her. But she would summarize things in ways that didn't quite match my impression. I always assumed I was missing context. She said it the way you say something you've been thinking about since a funeral. The third thing I found was in the estate materials. A printed email thread in a folder labeled Family, Miscellaneous. The folder contained the kind of low-stakes paperwork that accumulates over years, a copy of Claire's college graduation program, a forwarded news article, a recipe written out by hand, and a printed email thread, forwarded to my father by Claire, from 3 years prior. The subject line was FYI, from last week. The thread contained what appeared to be a message from me. My email address in the header. My name at the bottom. Sent to Claire, supposedly, the previous week. Describing, in specific detail, a crisis I had been in. A specific period of instability. Things I had allegedly said and done. Language I would not have used. Feelings I did not have, in a period of time that I remembered clearly as unremarkable. I had not written that email. I sat at my father's desk and read it 3 times. The email was not dramatic. It was not elaborate. It was written in something that almost sounded like my voice, but not quite. The way an impersonation sounds almost right until the moment it doesn't. I looked at the sent email address again. 1 character different from my actual address. A transposition. The kind of thing that is easy to miss if you're not looking. I set the paper down on the desk. I looked out the window at the backyard my father had tended for 32 years. I sat very still for a long time. My father had been shown a fabricated email from his younger daughter describing a mental health crisis. He had filed it carefully, labeled it Family, Miscellaneous, and carried it with him for 3 years. He had never said a word to me about it. Because Claire had framed it as something I had confided in her, that she was sharing with him, that I might not want him to know she had told him. She gave him the secret and the reason to keep it in the same breath. I did not call Claire. I asked to meet her in person. I sent her a text on a Tuesday plain, short. Asterisk, can we get together this week? Just the two of us. I want to talk, asterisk. She responded within minutes. Of course. She named a coffee shop near her apartment. Thursday at 10. I said yes. Thursday morning was overcast. The coffee shop was the kind of place with wooden tables and soft music and the kind of ambient warmth that makes everything feel slightly more manageable than it is. I arrived first. I ordered tea. I sat with my hands flat on the table and waited. Claire came in 7 minutes late. She was dressed the way she always dressed, put together, easy, the kind of person who makes effort look effortless. She smiled when she saw me. She sat down. She ordered. We made small talk for a few minutes. About the estate process. About a relative who had sent a card. The mundane work of two sisters in the aftermath of a loss. Then I said, I found Dad's journals. I watched her face. She did not flinch. She made a small, considering expression, the expression of someone receiving information and deciding how to receive it. She said, I didn't know he kept journals. I said, he did. She said, Are they hard to read? I said, some of it. I waited. She said, he wrote a lot about you, I'm sure. He thought about you constantly. He worried. She said it gently, with the texture of long-standing concern. The way she had always said things about me. And I recognized it. Immediately, completely. The language. The careful softness that sounded like love and functioned as something else. I put 3 things on the table between us. I had printed them. I set them down the way you set down a set of keys, plainly, without drama. The first was a journal entry from 6 years ago, referencing a conversation with Claire in which she had described a breakdown I had not had. The second was a page from another entry, a year later, in which my father had recorded, in his own words, that Claire had told him I had threatened to hurt myself during a difficult period. I had experienced no such period. The third was the printed email thread, with the wrong email address circled in pen. Claire looked at the papers. She did not pick them up. She sat very still for a moment. And then she began to speak. She spoke the way she had always spoken when things needed to be managed. Carefully. With context. With the measured tone of someone explaining something complicated to someone who might not understand it fully. She said she had been worried about me. That she had always been worried. That after our mother died, I had been in a place that was difficult and she had not known how to help. That she had confided in our father because she was scared. That maybe some things had gotten confused over time. That she had only ever wanted to protect me. I listened. When she finished, I said, I'm not here to argue with you. I don't need you to explain it or walk it back or find a different way to frame it. I know what I found. I know what Dad believed about me. And I know where it came from. She was quiet. I said, I want you to understand something. The version of me that Dad was given, the version that was unstable, struggling, frightened, unreliable, she was never real. I know that. And I think somewhere you know that too. Claire looked at me. And in her face, in the stillness of it, in the particular quality of what I can only describe as recognition, I saw something that might have been shame. Or the relief of someone who has been carrying a thing for a long time and has finally, in some terrible way, been allowed to set it down. She did not deny it. She didn't confess either. Not fully, not cleanly, not in the way that closes things. But she did not deny it. I said what I needed to say about the future. That I would not be available in the way I had been. That the relationship between us had changed, permanently, and that I needed her to understand the parameters of what I was willing to offer going forward. Not with cruelty, with the same quiet I had held throughout the conversation. Then I stood up. I left first. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat for a moment with my hands in my lap, and then I drove home. There are certain things you cannot do with a grief like this. You cannot undo it. You cannot go back and have the conversations that were stolen from you. You cannot sit across from your father and show him the journals and the email and watch his face move through the understanding. He is gone. That is simply true. What you can do is say the things that need to be said in his direction. Not for him. He won't receive them. But for yourself. Because some things need the shape of a sentence before they can settle into the right place. I wrote my father a letter. Not to send. Not to keep on display. Simply to write. I sat at my kitchen table on a Saturday morning with the window open and the particular quiet of early autumn coming through it, and I wrote. I told him what I had found. I told him about the journals and the email, and what I now understood about the 14 years of careful worry he had carried. I told him I was not angry at him. I told him I understood, completely, how it had happened. That he had trusted a person he loved with information about a person he loved, and that the trust had been exploited, and that he had never had any reason to see it. I told him about the October afternoon when we raked leaves together. I told him I had been carrying that afternoon for years, reaching for it when I needed proof that the real us was still there underneath everything. I told him about the notes my mother used to leave me. That I still had them in the shoebox, exactly where they had always been. I told him that the version of me that had lived in his mind for 14 years, frightened, unstable, struggling, diminished, was not me. That I was sorry he had been given her instead of me. That I had been here the whole time. I folded the letter. I put it in the cedar box that had sat on my mother's dresser and now sat on mine, a wooden box, small, with a small brass clasp that she had used for letters and photographs and the kind of things that don't have another category. The shoebox of notes lives next to it now. A few weeks after the confrontation with Claire, I called Gerald, my father's old friend. We met for coffee. He told me things about my father that I hadn't known, small stories from work, private jokes, the particular way my father had of showing up for people without making a big thing of it. And then, toward the end, he said, he told me once, this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about you, I forget how it came up. And he said, she's harder to know than Claire, but I think she might be the one who sees things most clearly. He hadn't qualified it. He hadn't amended it. He hadn't said it like someone trying to balance an account. He just said it, apparently. The way he said things that were simply true to him. I drove home with that. I have driven home with it many times since. It has been over a year now. The estate is settled. My father's house has been sold. Someone else's family lives in it now. I drove past it once, a few months after the sale, and the new family had planted something in the front garden, I couldn't tell what, something young and hopeful, and I thought that was right. I thought my father would have approved of someone tending it. My relationship with Claire is what it is now. Minimal. Civil when necessary. I did not close the door entirely, not because I owe her a door, but because I am not interested in the energy that closing it permanently would require. She exists at the edge of my life. I do not hate her. I do not need her to confess. What I needed was the truth. I got the truth. The rest of it can settle where it settles. The grief for my father is its own thing, separate from everything else, and I keep it separate. Because the grief is not about what Claire did. The grief is about my father, about the man who sat in the kitchen and told me I reminded him of my mother when she had a big idea. About the man who raked leaves with me on a Sunday in October and listened without the watchful caution. About the man who kept a journal all those years and wrote down his love for his daughters, including all the worry someone had put there. He was a good man. He was deceived by someone he trusted. Those two things are both true, and they do not cancel each other out. I think about the notes my mother left me sometimes. The ones she tucked under cereal bowls, inside book covers, on folded napkins. The ones that were just for me. Observations. Small lines. Evidence that someone was paying attention. I take the shoebox out sometimes and read them. They're the same as they have always been. There is one on a piece of yellow notepad paper, in her handwriting from when I was about 11, that says, asterisk, some people see more slowly than others. That just means they're seeing more, asterisk. She was talking about reading. We had been talking about school, about the pace of things, about the way some people moved through information faster and some people moved through it deeper. But I have held it differently over the years. I think about the slow accumulation of evidence in my father's journals. The way I read each entry carefully, the way I did not rush. The way I stayed with it until I understood the shape of it. Some things take time to see clearly. But they can be seen. If you have ever been quietly mistranslated, if someone has ever shaped the way the people who love you understand you, in ways you couldn't see while it was happening, I want you to know something. Your actual self was there the whole time. The real record of who you are is not in what other people said about you in rooms you weren't in. It is in every honest conversation you had, every steady choice you made, every moment of genuine connection that no one else had access to. Those things exist. They are not undone by the false version. My father had both. In his journals, he had the woman Claire had invented. In the October afternoon, in the kitchen table, in the way he listened when he forgot to be careful, he had me. I am choosing to carry the one that is real. Thank you for staying with this one. I know it is a long one. I know it doesn't have the clean arc of some stories, no courtroom, no legal victory, no document that reverses the damage in a single scene. The justice in this story is quieter than that. It is the kind of justice that lives in knowing the truth and deciding what to build from it. If this story resonated with you, if it sat somewhere real, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever felt like someone was explaining you to the people who loved you and getting it wrong? Tell me. I read every one. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like this, someone in the middle of something like this, who can't quite see the shape of it yet, share it with them. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.